served our country, both past and present, First National Bank, a Franklin family community bank, proudly sponsors Veterans of the Valley. Since 1862, First National has provided local decision-making and accessibility, as well as banking products and services to Brazos Valley citizens.
Welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. 4 months may not seem like a long time to most of us, but for Bob Bruner of the 1st Squadron, 4th Cavalry, U.S. Army, the 4 months starting on New Year's Day of 1991 was a period in time he'll never forget. Bob Bruner drove a Hum-vee in Operation Desert Storm's ground war, and he saw the war up close, from start, indeed, to finish. It was his unit that took the airfield at Safwan, Iraq, where the ceasefire was negotiated. It's a remarkable story of service, and we welcome Sergeant Bob Bruner to Veterans of the Valley. Bob, it is indeed a pleasure to have you here. I want to get you right to the Gulf War. New Year's Day, 1991, you actually celebrated the New Year when midnight you were flying to Saudi Arabia from Brussels, and I think you said the plane was over Ireland at the time, right?
Yeah, the pilot of the plane we flew over on, and there were a lot of civilian pilots that flew over volunteer for us, told us that if we looked over the right wing, we'd see the lights of Ireland, and if there was any place in the world we'd rather be, that would be a good place to be right now, and I would have to agree with that.
Indeed, but you landed at King Fahd Field in Saudi Arabia, and the first thing that you remember, you got out. You'd come from a cold area. It was mighty hot in Saudi Arabia, as one can imagine.
Yeah, we flew out of Ford Field, Topeka, Kansas, and there was a blizzard going on. And when we landed in King Fahd Field in Saudi Arabia, just outside of Dhahran, it was probably 80, 90 degrees, and we had full winter clothing on at that time, and looking for a place to get out of it.
You bus to a place called Khobar Tower, which you call the MGM Grand. It was kind of a high-rise condo complex with no furniture, but it was a place to sleep and sort of get over the jet lag. Talk about what happened after that, after you left Khobar Towers, and sort of take us from there into the start of the war.
We left Khobar Towers after our vehicles all arrived and moved, took a very long convoy up to northern Saudi Arabia. It was a very, very long convoy. It took all day and right up through the early evening.
Yeah, about 13 hours, I think you told me.
About 13 hours, yes. We pulled and kind of circled our vehicles, kind of like the old cavalry used to do, circle the wagons. We kind of circled the vehicles around, caught some shut-eye. We set up the forward area for the cavalry. 1st Squadron, 4th Cavalry was the called TAA Roosevelt, which is Tactical Assembly Area. And that's where we started getting all of our equipment and ourselves ready in case what did happen pursued, and of course the war started.
Now you talked about the vehicles that showed up. Let's go back to the States. These are vehicles that you had actually had a part in preparing to come over, as far as painting, camouflage, things like that, right?
Yeah, all of our vehicles were painted in a woodland camouflage, the green and the black and the tan, and of course that was set up for European theater. And we went from and one weekend drove the whole squadron down to a paint shop, kind of like I told you, like an Earl Shive's paint shop, and you had to put grease and tape on the windows, or they'd have painted over it. We had our desert camo painted on our vehicles, and then they rail-headed from Fort Riley, Kansas, down to Port Arthur, Texas, where they were put on transports and shipped overseas.
Give us an idea of Saudi Arabia and sort of what it was like. Lots of sand to deal with, as one would imagine.
Lots of sand, and it was the flattest place I've ever seen in my life, even worse than Kansas. And the sand there was really powdered, almost like a Nestle Quick, type of powder. Very, very fine powdered sand with about a foot underneath that solid rock, and very hard to dig foxholes and fighting positions and things like that.
Right, right. And you had to protect yourself from the sand, so you needed sort of unique equipment for that, right?
Yeah, we got there and realized the sand was so fine. We had no notice, and usually when you have people over there, you'll hear how things are. But we got over there and we found out, well, our weapons were getting very, very dirty very quick with this very fine powdered sand. So we requested pantyhose and plastic bags and items that were going to protect our weapons, especially the pantyhose. They worked amazing in keeping the dust and the sand off the bolts and the magazine covers and so on and so forth.
Right. Not just weapons, but any type of electronics and anything it would protect.
I had all the the plastic bags were really good for the tape recorders. Tape recorders were pretty popular over there because we'd send tapes back to our families.
Right, right. Take us on a little bit closer to when the air war started, which a lot of people can recall that date, sort of where they were in January 15th of 1991. But before that, you talked to me about a berm, and in a flat land, a berm obviously stands out.
Yeah, very, very, like I said, very, very flat terrain there, and it was getting closer to the deadline, and so we moved further north. We moved up to the neutral zone, which Iraq, when they went into Kuwait, the neutral zone is the diamond triangle-shaped part of the country that's in between Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. Mm-hmm. And the Iraqi army went ahead and occupied the neutral zone, and the engineers had went up to keep them from coming any further, put up a humongous wall, 12 to 15 foot tall wall of dirt and sand and rock, and probably about 12 to 15 foot wide, deep, I would say. We were there for the first start of it, and of course then when Jim Baker went over to Geneva to talk to the Iraqi delegation about possibly having a ceasefire, not even having a ceasefire, but peace talks before the war started, we pulled back for a few days, and of course when the Iraqi delegation said they weren't going to accept the peace talks, we moved up north again.
A lot of the time, though, when you were there, just sort of in a waiting mode, you weren't just sitting around playing football and playing volleyball. You all were training. There were a lot of training. There was a lot of training to be done to get ready for what might happen, as far as enemy recognition, things like that. Sort of talk about the constant training you were doing to prepare.
Well, from the time we landed at the Khobar Towers till the air war started, until the ground war started, training was taken very seriously. From what young soldiers are like, young kids today, they don't take a lot of things seriously until things happen, until you go to the gas chamber or something like that and experience that. But actually the younger soldiers were demanding more training. They wanted to feel more secure, and they have an understanding. We had a lot of new equipment that was issued us that we had never had before. The Magellan GPSs, what we drive around today with the TomToms and so on and so forth. We experienced that for the first time while we were there. We had the Magellan, it was called the Magellan GPS. We were unfamiliar with it and didn't do a lot of good in the middle of the desert, other than giving you one grid point to the next. But NBC training, weapons qualification still continued, constant upcheck of equipment. Our M1 Abrams tanks went through retro armor outfit while we were there within a 2 or 3 week period. So it was a constant training and constantly upgrading our equipment.
It's hard to believe it's been 17 years since that air raid, January 15th, 1991, nearly 18 years now. But I would imagine that anybody in their upper 20s or at least 30 years old probably can remember where they were, at least on the state side, watching television that night. I know I personally was up all night long watching. I guess CNN was the main network of choice there as far as 24-hour coverage of it. But that night, talk about the perspective that you had the night that the air war started in Desert Storm.
Well, the night the air war started in Desert Storm, we were in a camp, and we knew something was going to happen. We didn't know exactly when. We knew the deadline was coming up, and at 12 o'clock that time, I'm not sure what time it was back in the United States, it was earlier in the day, but we had aircraft go over. We had the call to go to all our fighting positions, so we all went out to our foxholes, and as we're running out there, the F-16s and the F-15s were flying right dead over camps at a combat flight level. I remember that we had a soldier of mine who had the M60 machine gun, was taking the M60 machine gun out to the fighting position. He didn't have his chin strap on, and it blew his helmet off. Mm-hmm. The suction from the jets flying over, and so everybody kind of chinned up their straps and got in the fighting positions, because you're like 2 or 3 feet deeper than you were standing on top of the ground being there. So very, very interesting. We heard the bombers fly over. At night, we'd sit there while we were in our fighting positions. You could feel the ground thump. You feel the concussion from the bombs that were dropping on some of the airfields just on the other side of the border. Like I said, we were still quite a ways from Baghdad at that time. I doubt it was Baghdad. We were amazed on the pictures we saw that come through the Stars and Stripes newspaper that we got. That still came to us periodically during the war. The pictures of Baghdad and all the anti-air fire and so on and so forth that was happening there. And the videos I saw of it when I got back, I was still rather impressed that we didn't lose more than we did.
Right.
But it was a very, very successful campaign. If we wouldn't have had a successful campaign in the air, we would not have had a successful ground campaign.
Right. You talked about the, well, that's moving on as we get closer to the ground war. Let's go ahead and go there. February 21st, 1991. That was the day that the ground war started. Talk about what your role was as a Hum-vee driver.
Well, I was the NBC, which is Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Squadron NBC NCO. And my secondary duty over there was the driver's training NCO. And I drove the squadron maintenance officer, and I drove the squadron NBC officer, and then I also drove for a few other staff positional officers that were there, some lieutenants and so on and so forth that worked for the squadron commander. Took them to meetings and so on and so forth. My main job as NBC at camp was to make sure all the monitors and alarms were set up and prepared in case something did go off, that we would do what we had to do by running our test. And you know, the night the ground war started, we talked about this yesterday. We were sitting up at the berm, and that night we knew that we were going to have a situation where the squadron commander and the squadron sergeant major said, "You all need everybody get sleep tonight. You and all your soldiers." We had MPs in that were the perimeter, because not even a quarter of a mile away from us was this berm. On the other side of this berm was Iraqi soldiers in fighting positions. And then the artillery and the MLRS units moved up in the middle of the night. About 2 o'clock in the morning, they started letting loose.
Tell them what MLRS is.
Multi-launch rocket systems.
Multi-launch rocket systems,
Yeah,
right.
just something that I had never experienced that before. I've experienced the 105 howitzers and things like that by doing training with them at the National Training Center in California. But it was my first experience with MLRS, and it was the prettiest fireworks show you ever see.
Indeed, it was, and it kept you up at night too, right?
Yeah, I mean,
it's pretty hard to sleep.
We probably would sit up most of the night talking before things happened. A lot of the non-commissioned officers did, and that night we probably just started buzzing out, and it's probably about 2 o'clock when all that stuff started taking off, and of course you couldn't sleep through that.
When we visited, you talked about the helicopter, the Apache, the Blackhawks, the Cobras, and they really saved your bacon on more than one occasion. The job that these aircraft did was just incredible.
Yeah, being in the cavalry, we had our primary vehicles were the M1 Abrams, M3 Bradley vehicle. Of course, we had multiple M577s, which were tactical meeting vehicles. But our biggest savior there during this kind of conflict was the Apaches, the Cobras, and the Blackhawks. And of course, there were still some Hueys and OH-58 Deltas, which is a KOA Warrior that the Scouts use. The Apaches and the Cobras were very, very much saved our bacon.
And very impressive to watch, is that right?
Very impressive to watch. You know, we've seen the Abram tanks and so on and so forth go through, and we knew what they were capable of doing. A lot of us didn't get to have live fire exercises with our air crews, and that was amazing to watch.
You were obviously impressed about the organization of the United States, the Allied forces. The enemy was pretty impressed also, weren't they?
Yeah, I think they were very, I mean, the coalition forces that we have were very overwhelming to them. We knew that the Iraqi army was going to be a tough army. We just weren't sure how tough. They'd just come out of a, 8 to 10 year war with Iran. So they were very combat veteran trained, and we hadn't had a lot of experience since Grenada, and that was usually, most of that was special forces, special ops that took care of that. So we were really an untested army at that time. Right. And with that training really proved to really help.
Let's go to some photographs
Sure.
now, and then we'll come back and we'll visit some of the pictures that Bob Bruner has supplied to us. We talked about the berm. This was the berm, right?
Yeah, that's about that 15-foot tall berm, and he's probably about 3 or 4 foot up, standing up, taking a picture of me up. And at the time we had this picture, we didn't realize that there was enemy Iraqi soldiers, probably another 25 foot on the other side there in firing positions, because, I mean, it went about another 10 or 15, about another 10 foot behind me there that you could walk on. And of course, we saw the fighting positions when the ground war started.
So you're smiling for the photo.
I was smiling for the photo, and yeah, Sergeant Major kind of got on us after this picture here. Said, "What are you idiots doing?"
Yeah, because the enemy's watching you too. Okay, let's move on. Next photograph.
This is myself, one of our maintenance NCOs, and another one of the scouts for the Cav, and we're at one of our setup areas here. Those are the Bradleys on a perimeter back behind us. Of course, there's camouflage. Not that green camouflage did a lot of good out in the middle of the desert, but we were coming back or going to a meeting at this time.
Yeah. Okay. Next one.
Me and a buddy of mine, another Sergeant Dave Woodman, and this is his deuce and a half truck he had with supplies in the back of it. This is on the way going back home, because you notice we don't have any flak vest or no weapons or anything on us. This is probably right at the border of Iraq and Saudi Arabia, going back home and getting ready to come down from everything.
Okay.
These were some of the first POWs captured during Desert Storm. These gentlemen were noticed come walking up in our perimeter. We went to our fighting positions because we didn't know how many people there were going to be. I think there was like 4 POWs here, and at this picture right here is our medical officer and medical personnel checking out the POWs, because we were very, we treated our POWs very well.
Yes. Okay. Speaking of POWs, there's...
This is actually at one of our checkpoints we had up in Iraq, not too far from in between Al Nazariya and Basra, not probably about 50 to 75 miles away from Baghdad. We had a lot of civilians walking out in the middle of the desert, and we had to investigate what the deal was, and come to find out they had military credentials. They were trying to get out of their uniform so they wouldn't be combatives. So, and at that time we were still taking POWs, and we brought them in. Of course, once they saw us, we were all best buddies, and they just loved President Bush.
Oh, absolutely. I think we got another picture of them smiling. And
oh yeah, peace sign, and
Americans, love President
this
Bush.
right here, they're saying we love Bush. So they were very happy that they were captured by us and not by Saddam. So.
Exactly. Okay.
This
promotion.
is promotion. This is the day I got promoted to staff sergeant.
Okay. Wanted to include that one. You had mentioned which is a place of biblical history, and talk a little bit about it. And that's where this is. You're on the left.
This is up by the Euphrates River in Iraq, and didn't realize how biblical that part of Iraq was. And our chaplain told us the Zur God of is there, and so we all went, and it's in the book of Genesis of as an and we went there, and it was just an amazing place. And just outside of that is what they call Abraham's City.
Let's go to the next picture, as a matter of fact.
And that's me standing with the guide we had. Was an Iraqi guide that knows this whole area and has worked with all the archaeologists. This is an area right here where they found a scroll that dealt with Abraham, and what they pretty much think is Abraham's house.
Wow, very impressive. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. We referred to it in the opening. This was at Safwan Airfield, where the ceasefire was negotiated. This is from a book called The Road to Safwan, this photograph. You're not in this picture, but I just thought this was an impressive photograph.
No, those are all my quarter horse buddies, though. That's C Troop 1st Squadron 4th Cavalry. We had a press day after Safwan, and we'll get into that in a minute, I think. And basically, the whole airfield was set up with nothing but quarter horse or 1st Squadron 4th Cavalry vehicles. And it just so happened this is Charlie Troop, and this is them. They're in front of one of their Cobras.
Right. Your operation changed. You got orders to go to Kuwait. Talk about that, and it was sort of during this time that you really got to see the ugly underbelly of war and the horror of war also. Sort of talk about these change of orders. Yeah,
being in a Cav unit, we were part of the 1st Infantry Division, and which is a time-honored division. It's been involved in most every conflict there is. And being in one of the most decorated units in history was a real privilege and an honor to be with those. And we led the 1st Infantry Division and the 7th Corps into Iraq. Once we got into Iraq, the orders changed. They said, you guys are going to Kuwait. So we cut across no roads, all across country, and it was late at night. We broke into the borders of Kuwait. We had some small arms fire and some tanks were going on. Like I said, the Apaches and the Cobras really took care of us with the night vision goggles. Took a little bit of artillery, nothing too close to worry about. But we saw these lights in the horizon, and I'm like, man, maybe there's a truck stop down there. We can go get a hamburger or something, you know. And you just kind of forget where you're at. And kind of find out as the more we drove, it was the oil fires that the Iraqi army had knocked all the heads off the wells and set their own oil on fire, the Kuwaiti oil on fire, because if they couldn't have it, they didn't want anybody else to have it.
Right.
We came across it's a four-way interstate, and it's called the Kuwait City Basra Highway. And there we encountered from what the aircraft had taken care of, all the Kuwaiti, the Iraqi army that was told to leave had finally started leaving, but they were bottlenecked up on the interstates, and probably about a half mile deep, and about 5 miles, one way or the other from one end to the other, north and south on the highway, on the interstate, there was nothing but vehicles. That night we had saw the Air Force and the Marine Corps pilots and the Navy pilots come in, and they really did a lot of destruction on that highway.
Right.
And of course, the Iraqi army did their share of firing back at the aircraft, and if they wouldn't have fired back at the aircraft and let us go in, it may not have proceeded to what it did, but they were still being combative. So.
Indeed, indeed. Let's talk about Safwan. The orders to take the airfield at Safwan, and you found out that this was very important because this is where the ceasefire was going to be negotiated.
We were about 50 miles in front of the 1st Infantry Division, and right when we got to the Basra, Kuwait City, there was a lot of death and destruction. And we spent some time there burying soldiers and giving proper burials and marking their graves because you can't have bodies around. We moved up. We got orders to take Safwan Airfield, which was at the border of Kuwait and Iraq. Very pinpointed, very small place. We wondered what was so important about it. But the whole 24th Republican Guard was protecting that airfield. So we moved up in the afternoon and got to the evening time. My squadron commander talked to the Iraqi general or colonel that was on the other end of the radio, and our squadron commander just demanded he leave the airfield immediately. They didn't want to leave so friendly at first. There was some small arm fire, went back and forth, a couple of Bradley shots. It was asked again, you need to leave. They chose still not to leave. The squadron commander called in the Apaches and the Cobras, and they hovered over the airfield over the Bradleys, and all of a sudden the Iraqi colonel or general, whatever he was, got on saying, "Okay, we're leaving. You got to give us 45 minutes." He says, "No, you got a half hour." So they started backing off and moving off the airfield. We captured Safwan Airfield. Kind of find out Safwan Airfield was the prime point where the ceasefire was signed. Within a day or two, General Schwarzkopf flew in, talked to our unit, congratulated us on a job well done, and told us we had to get the airfield ready for, this is where the ceasefire talks were going to be held at. We moved a bunch of enemy equipment up surrounding the airfield, and when General Schwarzkopf came up again, he says, "Boys," he says, I wanted to let the Iraqi army know that we were serious, not embarrass them. So we had to move some of that equipment back off. The next day, General Schwarzkopf flew in with his bodyguards and his detail and four Blackhawks. And that same day, the Iraqi delegation drove up in a convoy surrounded by Bradleys, Apaches, and Cobras. It was an Iraqi general that came in and talked to General Schwarzkopf. And of course, at that time, it was pretty much a high security deal, and we just kind of pulled perimeter guard on the airfield.
Right. But you can say that you were there when
I was there.
The end was planned, when the end was negotiated and agreed upon, right?
Yeah. After everything was said and done, General Schwarzkopf pulled the whole unit by and said, "You boys did a really fine job, and to reward you, what do you guys want?" We said, "We want some hamburgers or some steak." So he sent up, I think, 3 reefer trailers full of meat.
Right. And some beer, right? What kind?
Schlitz near beer.
But hey, it was wet, right?
That was all it was.
We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm glad we do. Tell us about your granddad.
Well, I've got a long history of a family that has served, and that's kind of what made me as patriotic as I am. But my biological grandfather was shot down in World War II. He was a navigator on a B-29, shot down over Japan, over the island of Kyushu, was taken to Kyushu University, where he was vivisection, which means dissected by the Japanese university there.
Right. And there was a book written about that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And you have that book. As a matter of fact, we've got a picture here of the cover of that book, and that's it right there. I want to leave that on the screen for a second. It's called The Fallen. As you can see, a true story of American POWs and Japanese wartime atrocities. And that was his unit, and that is your biological granddad, top row on the right.
Top row on the right. Kind of looks like he's got his hand in his shirt there.
Right.
And that was taken at Guam. Probably not too long before they were shot down. I mean, I'm not going to say how soon, because I'm not really sure when that picture was taken.
Right.
But I know they weren't on Guam very long.
Right. And your grandmother, of course, after this happened, remarried to the man that you knew as your granddad, of course. But this is certainly a history of World War II, and a book written that's certainly, obviously, very, very meaningful to you.
Still the greatest generation, that is.
Exactly. That's very impressive. You're a past commander of VFW Post 4692, something that you're very proud of. And
yes, sir.
We could do a whole other show about what the VFW does. But in the few seconds that we have left, talk a little bit about the VFW, because I know that you're trying to bring in younger and younger members.
Well, the VFW's goal in life is to honor the dead by serving the living. And our goals are to take care of the soldiers today and the people coming back, make sure they have easy transitions. We're big proponents with the Political Action Committee in Washington, D.C., where we fight for GI Bill and VA raises and compensation for disabled vets. There's so much we do. Plus, we do a lot of the locally in town here. We do youth programs like the Voice of Democracy and the Patriots Pen, Teacher of the Year, Fireman, Firefighter of the Year. There's a lot we do locally too to try to help again. To honor the dead by serving the living.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Operation Desert Storm will not take up a vast number of pages in our grandchildren's history books, but for the men and women who fought it and the families who waited it out, its memory will be one of a lifetime. Bob Bruner is one of the thousands of brave stories from that Gulf War of '91. We salute him and all veterans. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.